I remember thinking, you've done it now, Ozzy. So I said to Sharon, Sharon, can you phone an ambulance? I think I've broken my neck again. She was out that bed like a flash, running, screaming around. That's it, I've been doing it wrong. So I've got to the Bessie Ford clinic, and I'll go into Mrs. Ford's standing there, being Mrs. Ford being Gerald Ford's wife.
There are voices that transcend generations. Voices that don't merely sing but scream truths many fear to whisper. Voices that transform pain into power, silence into thunder, despair into revolution. Ozzy Osbourne possessed one of those rare voices. When he passed away on July 22, 2025, it wasn't just a man who departed. It was a force of nature that quieted after decades of shaking the foundations of music and popular culture. The Prince of Darkness, as he became known, wasn't merely a stage persona. He was the living manifesto of a generation that needed someone to express their discontent, their alienation, their fury against a world that seemed indifferent to their suffering. With his magnetic presence, visceral lyrics, and a voice that seemed to emerge from the depths of the human soul, Ozzy didn't just help create heavy metal, he gave voice to those who felt invisible. What made Ozzy truly extraordinary wasn't just his raw talent or his theatrical performances, but his incredible ability to survive. A man who repeatedly stared death in the face, battled devastating inner demons, and yet continued to rise from the ashes with an almost supernatural determination. His story isn't just about music. It's a testament to human resilience, proof that even the most broken souls can leave indelible marks on the world. This is the story of how an invisible boy from Birmingham became an immortal legend, and how his battles, against poverty, against addiction, against fame, against his own body, and finally against time, created a legacy that will continue to echo long after the final note has faded. Birmingham, England, 1948. Factory smoke covered the sky like a perpetual cloak of ash, reflecting the harshness of post-war working-class life. In this gray landscape, John Michael Osbourne was born, the sixth child in a family where bread was counted and affection rationed. His father, a factory worker exhausted and hardened by life, believed emotions were weaknesses. His mother, equally consumed by endless shifts on the assembly line, rarely had energy to offer more than the minimum necessary to survive. Young Ozzy, as he would later be known, wasn't the brilliant child, nor the charismatic one. He was the forgotten one, the boy who blended into the peeling walls of an overcrowded house. At school he found no refuge but a new battlefield. Letters and numbers danced confusingly before his eyes, making learning torture. Dyslexia, not understood in the 1950s, was mistaken for stupidity, making him an easy target for frustrated teachers and cruel classmates. You'll never amount to anything. Osbourne was the constant refrain that followed him through school corridors. The bullying went beyond words. It was punches in hallways, knees to the stomach, split lips behind school buildings. And no adult ever asked why. At home, when he returned in tears, he was met not with consolation, but with his father's belt buckle. Men don't cry was the brutal lesson they tried to instill in him. At 14, in 1962, the silence within him became deafening. In a tiny, dimly lit room, he tied a rope using his mother's clothesline, climbed onto a chair, and waited for the world to finally release him. But fate had other plans. His father burst into the room, violently yanked him from the chair, and instead of comfort, offered more violence, as if he could beat the despair out of his son. Something broke in Ozzy that day, or perhaps finally hardened. He stopped trying at school, stopped speaking unless absolutely necessary. He drifted through adolescence like a ghost, with the empty gaze of someone already partially absent from this world. At 15, he dropped out without qualifications, without purpose, without a plan. He worked wherever he could, slaughterhouse, construction factories, but was too distracted, too awkward, too broken to keep any job. By 17, the hunger he felt wasn't metaphorical. It was real, painful, relentless. His shoes had holes, his clothes frayed into rags, and his hope was a fragile thing he no longer bothered to nurture. In 1965, desperation drove him to a botched robbery attempt that landed him in Winston Green Prison. Behind those cold walls, surrounded by hardened criminals, Ozzy found himself fighting not just for respect, but for survival. During one confrontation, he defended himself with a metal chamber pot, not out of courage, but sheer survival instinct. It was there, in that cell, that the miracle happened. One afternoon, She Loves You by the Beatles crackled through a cheap prison radio, and something ignited within Ozzy. For the first time, he didn't want to disappear. He wanted to be heard. He wanted to make a noise louder than the silence that had been suffocating him his entire life. That moment changed me, he would later recall. I didn't know how to play anything, but I knew I needed to be on stage. I needed to scream louder than the pain inside me. After his release, Ozzy wandered the streets of Birmingham with a new fire in his veins. In 1968, he answered a modest newspaper advertisement seeking a vocalist. In a rundown rehearsal room, he met 3 other haunted souls. Tony Iommi, a guitarist whose missing fingertips couldn't diminish the fury of his riffs. Geezer Butler, a bassist whose fascination with the occult gave their music a supernatural unease. And Bill Ward, a drummer who played like thunder trapped in human skin. They initially called themselves Earth, but a chance encounter with a horror movie poster for Black Sabbath awakened more than just a new name. It gave them purpose. If people pay to feel fear, Ozzy would later reflect, why not give them music that terrifies and moves them? These 4 young men weren't trying to be famous. They were trying to survive, trying to purge something ugly and inexpressible. Their songs weren't entertainment, they were exorcisms. Agony translated through distortion, pain transformed into guitars. On Friday, February 13th, 1970, a date that seemed predestined, they released their self-titled debut album. The establishment recoiled in horror. Critics called it satanic, repulsive, unlistenable. But the alienated youth, the broken ones, the lonely, they heard something different. They heard their own suffering given voice and volume. In Ozzy's raw, untrained roar, they found validation for emotions they had been told to suppress. Paranoid, their second album released just months later, became scripture for a lost generation. Songs like War Pigs, Iron Man, and the hypnotic title track weren't just anthems. They were lifelines for those drowning in their own alienation. Ozzy's voice wasn't technically refined, but it was authentic. The voice of someone who had crawled back from the abyss and now dared the world to push him again. I didn't know what I was doing, he would later confess. I just knew it had to be loud enough to drown out the screams inside my head. As Black Sabbath's star rose, so did Ozzy's demons. The fame that should have validated him only amplified the void within. Drugs and alcohol weren't recreation. They were medication for a soul still bleeding from childhood wounds. His onstage persona, the wild eyes, the theatrical darkness, the notorious bat incident, masked a man increasingly lost in his own chaos. By the mid-1970s, Ozzy Osbourne stood at the pinnacle of heavy metal glory, but beneath the surface he was crumbling. Album after album elevated the band to legendary status, but Ozzy was sinking deeper into addiction and self-destruction. His bandmates watched helplessly as missed rehearsals, incoherent ramblings, and erratic behavior became the norm rather than the exception. In 1979 came the final blow. After nearly a decade as the voice of Black Sabbath, Ozzy was fired, not face-to-face, but through a messenger. A final humiliation for a man whose entire identity had become entwined with the band he helped create. They didn't even have the courage to tell me themselves, he would later recall. The pain still fresh in his voice. This was my band. It wasn't just a career they took away. It was my sanctuary. Exiled from the only place where his brokenness made sense, Ozzy disappeared into a Los Angeles hotel room, curtains drawn, drowning in daughter of Black Sabbath's former manager, saw beyond the fallen icon to the man still fighting beneath the wreckage. She pulled him from the darkness and whispered the impossible. You were the magic in that band. You can do this without them. Her faith struck like lightning against the whetstone of his spirit. And then came Randy Rhoads, a young guitarist whose technical brilliance was matched only by his quiet discipline. For Ozzy, still reeling from betrayal and clinging to sanity by threads, Randy was more than a musician. He was proof that beauty could still exist in a world gone cruel. Together they created Blizzard of Oz, released in 1980, an album born not from celebration, but survival. Songs like Crazy Train weren't just radio hits. They were declarations of defiance. I am still here. I still matter. The bond between Ozzy and Randy transcended music. On stage, they were electric, Ozzy, raw and unbalanced. Randy, controlled and transcendent. Backstage, they were laughter and philosophy, late-night conversations and mutual respect. Randy wasn't just a guitarist, Ozzy would say. He was my friend, my younger brother, the only reason I didn't give up. But storms never last. On March 19, 1982, during a tour stop in Leesburg, Florida, tragedy struck with the silence of a scream caught in the throat. A joyride in a small aircraft ended in catastrophe when the plane's wing clipped the tour bus. In an instant, Randy Rhoads was gone. 25 years old, a comet extinguished in daylight. Ozzy ran toward the burning wreckage, screaming Randy's name until his voice cracked and broke. He collapsed beside the crash, trembling, weeping, unable to comprehend the finality before him. I lost a part of myself that day, he would later say. It wasn't just Randy's body in that fire. It was my hope, my music, my reason to keep breathing. The man who had been pulled from ruin by a friend was now dragged back into darkness by fate. For weeks he disappeared into silence, unable to speak, unwilling to eat, drowning himself in alcohol just to numb the loss. The shows were canceled. The laughter ceased. The house fell silent. One might think the worst was behind him, that surviving the unthinkable would teach the soul to heal. But grief doesn't follow logic. The years following Randy's death weren't about recovery. They were about descent into a private, relentless darkness that clawed at Ozzy day after day until even music, his only salvation, couldn't drown out the silence. The 1980s passed in a storm of noise and numbness. Each tour felt like a war zone, each hotel room a shattered mirror of who he used to be. On stage, the world saw a madman with smeared eyeliner and a mythic persona. But backstage, Ozzy was fading, volatile, unreachable, barely holding on. Sharon, his anchor, tried everything. She had saved him once and refused to walk away. But even her love couldn't always pierce the fog he carried inside. I wasn't even in my own life, he would later admit. I was just gone. Then came August 1989, a night born not from rage but from total collapse. In a haze he barely remembered afterward, Ozzy did something so devastating it shook the foundation of everything he loved. He nearly destroyed the one person who had given him everything, Sharon. That night he was taken away, confused, hollow, unable to comprehend the weight of what had happened. He was sent not just to rehabilitation, but to a place where years of damage could finally be confronted. Behind those walls, without cameras, without applause, Ozzy sat alone and faced the wreckage of the man he had become. "What do you fear most?" a counselor once asked him. Without hesitation, Ozzy answered, "That she'll leave, that I've finally pushed her too far away." But Sharon didn't leave. Instead, she came to him, eyes tired but full of fire, and said, "You're still in there." I know it. It wasn't forgiveness, it was war. Every day in that center, Ozzy fought not for fame, not even for redemption, but for the right to keep the love he had almost lost. The battle was brutal. He emerged not cured, but changed, thinner, quieter, still haunted, but finally aware of how far he had fallen and how precious it was to rise again. In 1991, Ozzy released No More Tears, an album forged not in chaos, but in clarity. Tracks like Mama, I'm Coming Home weren't just radio hits. They were confessions carved from the marrow of a broken man trying to rebuild. The 1990s saw Ozzy throw himself into work as if afraid to stop moving. He toured relentlessly, released more music, and even announced a farewell tour in 1992. But true to form, he returned several times. The pain hadn't disappeared. It haunted quiet moments, whispered through lyrics, settled behind his eyes. But now he carried it differently, not as a weight that would drown him, but as a battle scar that proved his survival. The turn of the millennium brought an unexpected new chapter. In 2002, the Osbournes premiered on MTV, transforming the Prince of Darkness into an unlikely domestic icon. Suddenly, millions who had never heard a Black Sabbath album were invited into the chaotic, loving world of the Osbourne family. The show revealed a different Ozzy, confused by remote controls, devoted to his dogs, navigating the daily comedy of family life with self-deprecating humor. Behind the reality TV phenomenon was something genuine, a man finding peace in the ordinary moments that had eluded him for decades. But just as life seemed to settle into a new rhythm, fate dealt another crushing blow. In December 2003, A casual ride around his property on an ATV turned catastrophic when Ozzy lost control of the vehicle. The impact broke his collarbone, fractured several ribs, crushed a vertebra in his neck, and collapsed his lungs. For 8 days he hovered in a coma, silent, motionless, terribly vulnerable. Doctors warned it would take months, possibly years, to walk again, to breathe freely, to regain strength. But Ozzy had spent his entire life doing the impossible. Through pain so acute it left him gasping and rehabilitation that demanded everything of him, he began to rebuild. Each small step was a victory, each breath a testament. In 2004, just months after doctors questioned if he would ever walk again, Ozzy stepped onto the stage at the Brit Awards to thunderous applause. Not just from fans, but from a world that had watched him tumble and rise again and again. The accident left invisible scars. Chronic pain became a whispered companion, and some days, merely moving was a mountain to climb. "I wake up and it hurts," Ozzy admitted. "But I'm still breathing. That's enough." Just when it seemed Ozzy had endured all the torments life could inflict, 2019 arrived with merciless cruelty. A seemingly minor fall became catastrophic when it dislodged the metal rods in his spine from the 2003 accident. Soon after came the diagnosis of Parkinson's disease, a silent, relentless enemy that didn't attack all at once but slowly eroded what it meant to move, to stand, to be free. For a man who had once commanded stages with uncontainable energy, it felt like theft of identity. The tremors began. His balance faltered. And then came the public confession, raw and unfiltered. "I can't walk properly these days. I'm just wobbling. No masks, no rock star persona, just a man stripped to truth." His words carried not just honesty but heartbreak. The world that once watched him defy death now saw him face something more intimate, time itself. "These past few years have been sheer misery," he said in his final years, words heavy with fatigue and sorrow. The pain, the fear, the sense of losing control, it wasn't theatrical. It was real. Yet even as his body betrayed him, Ozzy refused surrender. In 2020, he released Ordinary Man, an album haunted by pain, but also filled with defiance. It wasn't just music. It was a declaration carved in sorrow and courage, saying, "I am still here. I still have something to say." On July 5, 2025, something happened that seemed less like a concert and more like a closing prayer for an entire generation. Ozzy Osbourne, flanked by the original members of Black Sabbath, returned to Birmingham for an event called Return to the Beginning. Over 40,000 fans packed the arena while nearly 6 million watched from around the world. When Ozzy appeared slowly, leaning on a cane with Sharon by his side, the crowd fell silent, not out of restraint, but reverence. His voice cracked with age. His hands shook. But when the first note sounded, time distorted. Each lyric bled with memory. Each riff felt like resurrection. "This may well be the last time I ever stand on a stage," he said later. Not with sorrow, but with serene finality. That night, the curtain didn't fall. It floated gently like twilight over a career carved in thunder. Every dollar from the show, an impressive $190 million, went to causes that mattered deeply to him. Parkinson's research, Birmingham Children's Hospital, and animal rescue shelters. In his final weeks, though spotlights no longer chased him across stages, Ozzy reached his fans through quiet moments of honesty in a podcast with Sharon. "I spent half my life trying to die," he reflected, "and the other half learning to live." On July 22, 2025, Ozzy Osbourne, the Prince of Darkness, finally found peace. He left behind not just music, but a legacy of resilience that transcended art. In his will, he allocated much of his $220 million fortune to mental health initiatives for musicians, addiction rehabilitation programs, scholarships for working-class youth, and lifetime funding for animal rescue shelters. His funeral in Birmingham drew over 100,000 people to the streets. Musicians from every genre came to pay tribute not just to an icon, but to a survivor whose broken path had somehow made their own journeys possible. Ozzy's face now adorns murals in dozens of countries. His lyrics are quoted by professors and tattooed on fans. But his true legacy lives in the countless lives he touched. The addicts who found sobriety through his example. The outcasts who found belonging in his music. The broken who found strength in his survival. The boy who once tied a rope to end his pain became a man whose voice helped millions endure theirs. The invisible child of Birmingham became a legend whose echo will never fade. The Prince of Darkness who, in the end, found his own light. What made Ozzy Osbourne extraordinary wasn't technical perfection or unblemished character. It was his raw humanity, his willingness to fall publicly, to break openly, to rebuild defiantly. In a world that demands masks, he showed his scars. In an industry that manufactures personas, he offered truth in all its ugly, beautiful complexity. In the end, Sharon would later say, Ozzy wasn't perfect. Far from it. He was broken, flawed, sometimes destructive. But he was authentic. He transformed his pain into something that helped millions deal with their own pain. And in the end, that's all any of us can hope to do. The last words belong to Ozzy himself from his final interview. You know what I've learned after all these decades? The darkness is real, the pain is real, but so is the light, so is hope. And sometimes you need to dive completely into the darkness to truly appreciate the light when you find it. Rest in peace, Prince of Darkness. The noise has finally stopped. The silence you once feared has become your peace. But your voice, that defiant, broken, powerful voice, will echo forever.